I just don't want to put any more stress on my family.
The spooky season is upon us.
Indeed it is. Woo!
And you know what that means? Spooky season means spooky movie. And let me tell you, this is a spooky one, all right.
It's better than therapy.
I mean, you say that, but then Ari Aster keeps making these. But yeah, this is kind of, I guess you could say like a blast from the past. This was really big for a while. Don't know how big it is on film Twitter anymore, mostly because I'm not on Twitter anymore. But oh my god, this movie, I remember hearing about this first. Do you remember this is kind of making the rounds online in 2018?
Mm-hmm. We should say that we are going to be talking about the 2018 film Hereditary.
I mean, there's going to be like a little intro here. I'll put an intro in here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so people will know. And it's going to be in the thumbnail. And it's going to be in the title. So.
I don't look at thumbnails. I just click blindly when I open up YouTube.
Oh, no. That's a one-way ticket to...
Explains a lot.
You can find yourself in front of Coco Melon with that attitude.
Oh, no.
On the other end of the spectrum, God, this movie. So I saw this when it was in theaters 2018, but I didn't see it again since.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first saw it, I was like, oh, I liked it, but I don't think I quite got the same amount from it that I did in this watch through.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly because back then I was still getting into movies, I was still, seeing what was out there and kind of developing my analysis a bit more to be like, oh, let's dig in and see what's going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And so now coming back, I feel like I was able to get more this time around. Not only because of that, but also Ari Aster has since released 2 more movies, and he's starting to develop a theme in his work.
Yeah, I think that this is a movie that, benefits from return viewing. I saw this, in the cinemas or whatever, and relatively unspoiled. I think, there were things going around. I saw it maybe, relatively close release, but things were going around, and there was, it had this reputation of oh my god, this crazy stuff goes down, but I somehow managed to go in. But I've seen it, I want to say a handful of times subsequently, and I think that knowing where it's going, can help you kind of start to put things together thematically or from just kind of a holistic standpoint, but also, as you're saying, from the benefit of having seen, especially Midsommar, he's definitely one of those directors who's interested in specific spaces, like psychological spaces or traumatic spaces, and kind of having that dialogue is interesting. I think each film can stand on its own, but I think you can also kind of see things feeding into one another and developing.
Yeah, there's, by seeing how, the things he focuses on in his other movies, now coming back to this, I was like, okay, what should I focus on here? What should I keep an eye out for?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I feel like I was able to, as I get a lot more out of this viewing. And yeah, we'll kind of talk about it because, right away, first of all, it's spoilers for a 6-year-old movie. But right away, I'm just routinely impressed by Ari Aster's ability to direct actors, especially. Mm-hmm. What did he say to Toni Collette to get her to give this gut-wrenching performance? I'm trying to think of a specific scene to highlight, but there's so many I could choose from. There's the, when she finds Charlie's body in the car.
Mm-hmm.
When, she gives the famous, I am your mother rant. And Alex Wolff. Oh my god, Alex Wolff in this.
Yeah. Peter is... I think what makes this really interesting to experience is, you know, we're introduced to the family kind of in the throes of, or immediately after, a sort of familial tragedy, and how much the various family members respond to the death of Annie's mother, the sort of the matriarch of the family, varies. But it is, you know, a funeral and a death in the family is something difficult to go through. And then there's obviously, it just only gets worse from there as the film goes on. But I think the dynamics between the family, which we sort of get into as the movie goes on, are clear, if only like implicitly, from the very beginning, and having that really clearly kind of established, not so much to the audience right away, but you get the sense that all of the performers know what the family have gone through before this, the relationships between, there's a confrontational nature to a degree between Annie and her son Peter, whereas Steve, the dad, has to kind of, he seems to feel this need to be this kind of stoic rock to ground everything else, and the degree to that success or failure and where that goes is like, that's all there from the get-go. And I think that having that really, really helps to kind of focus everything else that's going to happen.
Yeah, that's because right from the beginning, and like you said, going back for a repeat viewing and knowing the arc of everything, I'd be like, oh wait, this was, you know, very prominent in the shot here. This was in the window. This was, you know, like, and so being able to see all of that in hindsight, I think, is, you know, you get to see more of like the symbolism of the movie being opened up, more of the little setups that you didn't even know were setups, and seeing how they pay off in the end makes it all the more engaging. But yeah, right from the beginning, we got hold on a sec. I took my notes here, but they're all kind of all over the place. I will say one of the things that was interesting going back is that the movie was very, I don't know how to say it, like a lot of the stuff that I remembered from my initial viewing, at first it's like, oh, this all, like, a lot of it's in like the first half of the movie, because you have the matriarch of the family dies, and we're kind of starting to see the dynamic everybody has with each other, and it's already not great even at the beginning of the movie.
No, it's very tense.
You know, her mother is kind of surrounded by tragedy a lot of the times. But it's also kind of curious with what we learn about her later is, you know, was that perhaps all orchestrated by her and just kind of passed off as, you know, they try to classify it as, oh, some kind of mental illness, because that's the rational thing to do. And it might have been this supernatural stuff. But anyways.
Right.
But, you know, like I said, there's already tensions that are in place. You know, like, you know, their son is a teenager, and that comes with all the problems that entails.
Right.
And then their daughter is kind of a weirdo.
She's a little different.
A little different, like...
She's an artistic type, one could say.
Artistic type who cuts the heads off of pigeons at the schoolyard with scissors.
It's called mixed media collage.
That's... Yeah, so like right away you can already tell something is really off, and there's that scene where Annie goes to the group therapy. She just kind of unloads all the stuff about how, you know, how there was, you know, growing up was rough, and her mother was very manipulative, and they went no contact for a long time until very recently. You know, her mother was active, you know, wasn't involved with their son, but became very active in their life when Charlie was born.
Exactly.
Charlie being their younger daughter. And it's like, so like already they're kind of picking up the pieces. There's a little bit of spooky stuff going on. And then the party happens.
Yep. It is a very normal house party, and nothing goes wrong. It's all okay.
Maybe in your cut of the movie, even like the edited version, where it just...
This is like an inspirational comedy, right?
How would that work? It's just like, you get to the party, nothing happens, the end.
They like drive back and like there's like a Gallagher hammer sound, and then they get to the hospital and it's okay.
There we go. No, this results in the death of Charlie, orchestrated by the cultists who are around Annie's mother. And that's the kind of... It's hard to describe what happens in this movie without constantly going like, oh, all the way back to the end and the stuff we know there.
Well, I think that part's pretty easy. So they're driving in a car, and then she's having, anaphylactic reaction to nuts that she's not supposed to be eating. That apparently this cake is just riddled with nuts. I want that recipe. That sounds terrifying. And, heads will roll.
No!
Yes.
And actually, like, when I was watching it this time, I specifically was looking at the cake. And, there's massive nuts all over
there's,
the cake.
Like, the introductory shot to the entire house party. It must be, like, they must live, like, near, like, Aspen or something, because that is a nice house that those kids are in. Like, there's just art all over the walls and stuff. But there's this girl just chopping an entire tree's worth of walnuts or something just out on a chopping board.
And then it's just like, oh my god. Hold on, I gotta see if I can find the thing here.
I will say, yeah.
No, go ahead.
To kind of the point that we're getting at, all this first portion up to this like profound what the fuck moment happening that really sort of pushes things off the edge. You're talking about the kind of ambiguity of the cult and their machinations with this whole thing that become increasingly apparent and kind of forefronted as we go past this and we sort of start to learn more about the whole situation. Initially, it's a lot more subtle. Annie and the mom both have that pendant with the Paimon sigil that they're wearing at the funeral. Charlie kind of looks at... There's just some creepy dude who's just grinning at her during everyone paying respects to the grandmother's body, and those are littler details that you kind of maybe on first watch are like, there's something there, but you're not necessarily thinking about it. But to kind of look at the movie as a whole, the way that it structures it, horror movies as like quote unquote metaphors for grief or metaphors for this or whatever. That's how horror's always been, but I feel like we're kind of at a point where we're beating it into the ground. But this feels almost different, where this works on two levels. This is just a family ripping itself apart as a result of several tragedies that just keep piling on, and all of that works narratively by itself. And there's all this really interesting character work that's grounded entirely in those relationships, and then to be able to layer that on and have these more overt horror elements or cult horror or supernatural horror elements that work in it but just in parallel is really interesting and from a structure standpoint.
Yeah, and I think what I like about this is that, because obviously, grief is one aspect of the movie here, but I think it's also about how, again, this is something that Ari Aster likes to talk about in his movies, toxic relationships.
Yeah.
It's like, especially between parent and child. We saw that in Bo's Afraid, and we see that here.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very
Yeah.
specifically listening to the dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Because Annie's talking to Charlie, and because Annie, again, she talks about her mother, wasn't real great. They didn't have a good relationship. She would and while she's not being that way to to her kids, she's still like, there's this moment where Charlie, goes outside. She's kind of entranced by something spooky again. And Annie comes in and it's like, oh, you don't have your socks and shoes on, but you do, and get back in the house. But she doesn't phrase it like that.
Mm-hmm.
She says it like, why are you outside? Are you some kind of idiot?
Right.
Very belittling.
Mm-hmm. And her relationship to Peter is very troubled, even to a degree, before he's kind of responsible for this accident that causes Charlie's death, and that just pulls the lid off that. And she, at various points, to him directly or to in kind of this sort of dream internal struggle, is wrestling with this dynamic. And it's about these relationships and about just how shitty grief is. Like, this isn't something, this consumes them essentially.
Yeah, and as I've said, I love the way the movie handles this, because from the point when Charlie is killed in the car,
Mm-hmm.
I want to say it's like somewhere neighborhood, like 10 or 15 minutes go by, and none of the the family say anything to each other, and yet, and it's almost completely dialogue free. There's like a little bit here and there, but you can just tell exactly how they're all feeling about each other, and it is so powerful. Like, first of all, Alex Wolff, Jesus Christ, like, second thing did not dull just like the absolute pit I felt in my stomach when he's just like, he's in the car and like it goes quiet, and it's like he starts to look at the mirror, stops himself, like he can't look, and the camera focuses on like, he lets go of the steering wheel, like it's all slick with sweat and everything. And it sinks into you deeper and deeper, like the sheer horror, the awfulness of what just happened.
Yeah, it's just that, like, I don't want to look. If I don't acknowledge it, maybe it was all just some weird fluke, that it's not real. I can avoid thinking about this and therefore make it have not happened. And it's so, like, his performance is really like that, just catatonia of like, you don't even know how to respond at the moment. You're not even necessarily, he's freaked out, but it's not, you're not crying or overreacting. You're just sitting there in shock. And it's interesting, we'll get to it, but the visual language of the film is super interesting throughout and very intentional and stuff. But I was noticing, especially on this watch, and this is the first instance of that, the only time we get what you could consider to be like a really subjective shot or like a point of view shot is with Peter. We close in on his face right after, the phone call happens. But so we get up on him, we see him, and then the camera becomes his point of view as he tries, like, he wants to look at the rear view mirror, and then he can't. He has to look away, and we're in his perception. And we come back to that a couple more times. He has that little moment where he's kind of revisiting that in the classroom because he can't escape that horrific moment, or at the funeral or like the kind of wake for Charlie. There's the moment where he's just sort of looking through the stained glass, and just you're looking through that weird kind of distorted yellowy frame, and everything looks awful. Like, you get a couple of check-ins with him, and even if we're following Annie's trajectory and her kind of spinning out through the entire film, he's kind of the most rooted in the audience perspective that we get.
Yeah, and this is the way it just really makes that builds that empathy, because watching it the first time, watching it this time, it just drags me back to, because like, have you ever had something happen where you got in trouble? You got in trouble, like at school or something, and like the worst thing, it wasn't just getting in trouble, but having to tell your parents.
Right.
You know, and you're like, oh my god. And really, like, what I felt from him in that moment, like, as he gets home, he doesn't say anything. He doesn't even take the body out of the car. He goes in and just, like, goes to bed. And he's just, like, you know, he's lying there. And in the morning, you hear, you know, Annie being like, oh, you know, I'm gonna go get something from the store, you know, I'll be right back. And you overhear her discovering the body, and it's like, and for me, that was him kind of like trying to cling on to the last few seconds that he had before he was the kid who killed his sister.
Right. He's still trying to be that. It's after the event for him, but it's before for everybody else.
It's like that last moment where it's like, because yeah, that happened, but he is just like trying to, like, the last few moments where he isn't seen as that, you know.
Right.
Oh Jesus, it's just thinking about it again is making me feel so sick inside.
You know, that really just colors everything else that happens.
Yeah, and I'd say this other moment that just, it just got under my skin was, like, they try to go about their lives, like, Annie is really not taking it well. Like, she's sleeping in the treehouse that Charlie spent her time in. Her husband is just like, you know, you're not coming to bed anymore, like, you know, and Peter's like practically sleepwalking through school, like he's in a daze. And there's a shot where, like, he gets home and he's walking to the front door, and the camera moves to show Annie sitting in the car, just like glaring, and the camera moves again, and we see that, almost said Alex, Peter is like standing there, like he's not meeting her gaze, but his fists are clenched, and just, you know, he knows that she's staring at him. And it's just like, oh, like the way that it communicates so much with no words at all. Holy shit.
No, it's really just economical, effective. You know exactly what's going on. You know the dynamic between these characters, and that's all you need. And it's devastating for its minimalism.
Now, one thing I did notice, though, that was kind of curious, because, like, obviously, Annie has a lot of very strong emotions towards Peter in the wake of this.
Yes.
But I can't help but notice that when Joan approaches her for the first time, you know, it's kind of like, hey, you know, let's go on. And the way she phrases it, she says, Annie says, my daughter was killed. And she doesn't mention her son. So, and I thought that was noteworthy that she said that instead of saying, oh, my son killed my daughter or something like that.
Yeah, she's got this very kind of defensive sort of externalization of the way she did. It's very clinical and very kind of at a remove. Sort of in contrast with her when she first goes to that sort of support meeting, and she has her monologue about her mother's relationship. It's a lot more, heated, I suppose you could say, or there's a lot more, she's a lot more personally invested in it because it's her directly versus this other, she seems to be a little bit more closed off from it. And that kind of carries her conversations about it.
Yeah, it's...
I think it's also interesting, sort of talking about, you know, with Peter, we have, you know, you're talking about this numbness, which when we see the two kids in class, like before all of this happens, you get the sense like there's already these kind of like malingering things happening. Charlie's, you know, doing her thing, and then Peter's always been kind of checked out, but after this happens, it's just curtains for him, and he's not, you know, actively participating. But with Annie, there's this sort of, she's already been working on these as a sort of way to deal with her mom problems, but she really leans into making her miniatures, and that seems to become a way to try and analyze what's happening when Steven sees the miniature of the accident. It's like, what the fuck, like, don't show Peter this is, you know, awful. And she describes it as like a neutral, I forget exactly what she calls it, but it's like a neutral depiction of the events. Like, this seems to be another way for her, at least in this stage, before we really get the involvement of Joan, to try and avoid all of this by saying, okay, I'm just going to make miniatures, I'm just going to depict this, I will create these events and get something out of it.
And two things. Like, first of all, one of the things I love is that just like the way that the characters get built in Ari Aster's movies, just like there's such like a psychological richness to them. I'm gonna make that in my next YouTube video, just like psychiatrists watch Hereditary, therapists watch, you know, what would you say to them? And it's like 5 hours long.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, like he builds this richness, yeah, and then it informs the entirety of the film. The way the film is shot, almost from the opening, and the composition of everything is very much in the style of Annie's miniatures, and creates like another iteration of this sort of unpacking through the modeling process, and it makes the film as a whole the same thing, which ties into all these other elements, the performances, etc.
Yeah, I think that I'm actually glad that you brought up her modeling, because like they building the little miniature models, because there's, I think there's like this, it's something that comes up again and again through the movie, because she does it obviously, but also Charlie builds her own little miniatures out of bird heads and whatever else she can find. And you can see them kind of depicting the events of the movie that are going to be coming up, kind of like little hints of what's to come. But also the cultists will do this. Like, when Annie's kind of like, she's starting to realize, wait, something isn't right, there's more connections than I thought, she goes to see Joan, and while she can't get into Joan's place, we can go in and we see, you know, first of all, like pictures of, I keep wanting to say Alex, Peter. I keep wanting to say the actor's name. You see pictures of Peter on like a little shrine, you know, there's the same symbols that Annie's mom had in her room, and there's a little miniature diorama of it's like 3 figures kneeling before like a bunch of heads and a figurine, and you're like, oh shit, something's about to go down.
Right. It's both an iterative process and this sort of feedback between this controlling cult and the family.
Right. And that's the key word right there. You just said it, controlling. controlling, because the very first thing we see in the movie, like the first shot is moving around, and we see like we zoom into one of the miniatures, but then it reveals, oh, it's actually a shot of Peter's room. He's getting woken up to go to the funeral and everything, and so it already starts to conflate the real life house that they live in with the miniature house. You know, and it kind of parallels the way that Annie is like, oh, you know, the process of making a diorama is intrinsically very controlling. You set things exactly the way you want them to recreate exactly what you want. And in that same way, we discover that Annie's mother has orchestrated all of these events with her cultist friends to basically become super rich.
Right.
You know, to invoke a demon lord and get super wealthy in reward for that. And so I think that's just like, it's a really clever parallel there. Plus, it has the added benefit of her being able to recreate scenes from her past so that we can see it easily without her having to say, oh, back it, you know, when is like oh, here's remember that time when she came into our room when we were sleeping and stood in the doorway all weird? That was funky, huh? Like, she don't have to say that. We just see her building the diorama, and we can think to ourselves, oh, it must be a memory that she has. And I think that's a little weird. That's a weird kind of memory to have.
Yeah, it's a very interesting narrative device.
But yeah, so we got that. God, there's so much I want to dig into here. This is I'm kind of struggling with this just because I want to go like all the different directions at once.
Yeah, there's so much, which makes it interesting.
There's,
you know,
I was like
talking about, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, talking about the cult, you know, because we meet Joan, who kind of becomes the, I don't know what to call, the like facilitator or the most direct point of contact that allows the cult to kind of push things forward. Midsommar is more like his quote-unquote cult movie as far as looking at kind of how that Harga cult could, you know, could perpetuate what they were doing. But here we do see like the way that they prey on Annie specifically, but on the family as a whole, because she is grieving, and the way that Joan gets into her headspace is very much in like kind of a love bombing sort of way, in the way that she is very open and motherly in a way, and listening to her, and then starting to poke at the weird shit that's going to allow for them to continue. But you know, it's this very sort of overwhelming sense of it's approximating love and affection. It's not, because she's got these ulterior motives, but she's creating the appearance of that in order to, you know, get at what she wants from somebody who is vulnerable, and maybe this is a way to get to her.
Yeah, it's just again, like that's what that's what gets me so much about this movie, is that it's not like, oh, scary monster. It's the people in Annie's life are just like, and I think it's very, because obviously you have the machinations here of grandmother and her fellow Paymanites. What do you call the worship of Payman?
There we go. Paymanites.
The
Seventh-day paymentists.
Seventh Day Paymentists. There we go. But I think what also gets to the heart of it is because you take away the supernatural aspect and everything, and you have a story where this mother who, again, her own upbringing was very lacking, and so she doesn't have the tools to process all of this. Because, like, theoretically, if she had been like, hey, like, you know, if she had managed to be like, oh, my daughter doesn't want to go to this party, I'm not gonna send her, you know, hey, my son, I'm gonna try to talk to my son. If she was able to talk to people and her son was able to like relate those things better, then the whole plot would have failed.
Oh yeah. No, it really, like, and they are trying. I remember even before we really meet Joan, there's that they're going at it from every angle possible. Like there's the image of the mail slot with all the mail, and then you see someone slip in the kind of spiritualist ad. So yeah, there's like, all of this, like, you know, attempts to provide pseudo support, and there's all this by contrast opportunities for their failure, which don't come to fruition.
Yeah, it's like they're just surrounded. So it's like, but it's interesting to think that if, you know, like there could have been a way out. Like if they had, again, if they had gone to therapy, then they would have been like, hey, there's some weird shit going on. Let's get out of here. And
well, that is a really scary notion, the idea that someone who is ostensibly trying to help you actually wishes you harm. Like, that's fucked.
Yeah, and it's like, and it's not even necessarily like, oh, I want to hurt you. It's just, I want something from you, and I don't care what happens to you after that.
Exactly.
And it's just like, oh, it's, oh my, and to kind of bring it back to what you're saying about grief, I feel like that's something they weaponize as well, because you have, you know, because after Annie's mother passes, she's like, well, like she literally says, should I be sadder? Should I, like, you know, like, Grandma wasn't very well loved. Grandma was not well missed. But, you know, Charlie hits way harder. And, again, a key part of the plot, the way that they get Payman's spirit back into the house is by saying, don't you want Charlie back? You can have her back. You don't have to say goodbye. All you gotta do is take this, say this note, light this candle, and everything will be okay.
No warning bells at all.
But that's just it, because, like, you know, at that point, she's, you know, Annie's kind of lost it. And so, and that's what they use to get to her. And that's what I think helps us to stand out. Because like you said, oh, the horror is a metaphor for grief is a bit trite at this point. It's like metaphors for grief, we've had enough of those over the past decade.
Right.
But I think that this still hits harder because it has the different layers, because it has, again, just like the raw emotions that are on the screen. It's like, Jesus, like I was like sitting there, like it was as if like Toni Collette was like yelling at me. I was like, oh my god, no, I'm sorry.
No, it really puts you through the ringer, and yeah, it is all kind of down to this like emotional just exhaustion that's happening. Like if there were a cut of the film up until the very, you know, last 20 whatever minutes that was just from Steven's perspective, you know, his wife is kind of a little numb to the death of her mother, and then she's upset at her son after the daughter dies and lashing out, and then all of a sudden she's completely manic and has this candle and is talking about being a medium and stuff. That, you know, that's terrifying in its own right.
Yeah, it's like, I felt so bad for that guy.
Yeah.
Because like with the other two, you can kind of be like, well, you know, Alex did go to that party he wasn't supposed to, or like, you know, be like, oh, Annie's not being the best mother. But this guy did like literally nothing wrong, and he just, oh no.
Yeah, he really, and you can sense, like, I think Gabriel Byrne's performance is really, they're all strong, but he does a very good job of still kind of having his own deterioration. At the very beginning, he's very kind of the, like, all right, this is what the, you know, not the dad has to do per se, but the kind of like, okay, like, I'm gonna insulate people from grief or try to do that. And then by the end, he's getting concerned and frustrated and, you know, what am I gonna, I can't indulge this anymore kind of thing, which is not where he's at the start. So everyone's kind of being chipped away at in their own way.
Yeah, like there's that scene where like he gets Peter from school again, and he nearly runs that red light, like he hits the brakes, and in that moment, like he kind of breaks down. And I think that's him realizing that, oh, like, I'm starting to fuck up. I nearly got us killed. And I can't afford to not to be... Like, I can't afford to make mistakes like that.
Exactly.
It's just like... And yeah, because, like, you know, a lot of people, you know, you look at this movie, you look at Toni Collette, you look at Alex Wolff, you look at, you know, Millie Shapiro, and a lot of them, they rightfully get praise for... You know,
absolutely,
what they do in the movie. Like I forgot Millie Shapiro is only in like a quarter of this movie. She feels like she's in it so much more. That's how much of a presence she had.
No, she's completely vital to this all working.
But Gabriel Byrne definitely, like, you know, even though he wasn't like as showy of a performance, he still, you know, he was so vital there, and you can feel that he's kind of like the tether. It's like because each of the characters, you know, we get a chance to follow them around and be like, oh, here's what's going on with them. And he's the one that feels like the most, I guess, normal, I guess you could say. And so it's easy to look from his perspective and be like, yeah, this is some really weird shit that's going on. Like, you know, he's talking to Annie, and Annie's like, oh, you know, my mother's decomposing corpses in the attic. He's like, great, she's lost it. She's finally lost it. He goes up there. He's like, oh my God.
Yeah. In a movie with lots of very distinct screams, he has one of my favorite ones.
Yeah, it's, oh man. Yeah, so everybody in this dynamic, this really pulls it all together. Just, oh my, the movie really toys with you, and that's one of the things I really love about it. Now, I do want to talk about that, kind of get to the ending here, and the ending, I will say, when I first saw this, the ending felt a little out of place to me. It did feel a little strange, and like watching it this time around, I think it fit in a bit better. I think because I was able to anticipate it and also see other stuff in the movie. It's like, okay, it kind of fits in still. But there's still some parts where I think it's a little silly. Maybe a little bit silly. Because, like, specifically where, like, Annie, she's being possessed, I think by Payman. It's like he's using her before he can get his proper vessel in Peter. But she's like swimming in the air around the ceilings. And for a movie that's been like relatively grounded up to this point, like, you know, there's like stuff moving in the seances and everything, but it's like pretty low key. Having Toni Collette fly around like it's the fizzy lifting drink scene. But it's a little silly.
God, it really is the same. Yeah. God, I'm not going to be able to unthink the fizzy lifting. God, it's tainted forever. This movie sucks. I hate it. I'm going home.
Sorry.
No, I can see where you're coming from. Like, I think that, like, they do a good job of baking in the Satanism is clear throughout. They're finding, you know, satiny and pandemonium and shit written on the walls, and there's the sigils everywhere. So, like, the idea, that vocabulary is there from the start, pretty much. But it is definitely an escalation to have that kind of overtly demonic stuff. The most overt things we've had is that kind of like the light that the various people see. I think it's kind of like the transference of Paymon's energy. You know, Charlie sees it, and then Peter sees it, and then she eventually does. And then, like you're saying, the seance, which isn't anything more crazy than, you know, last year we talked about the changeling, and there's that automatic rating sequence and stuff, and that's all pretty, you know, let's call it grounded by contrast. But yeah. I can see like her floating through the air, or like being able to kind of be pressed up in the corner of the ceiling is definitely different, but I kind of was willing to let it go for that. And I think the reason that it worked for me was at that point it's almost pure horror, but he's using the same visual language throughout. It's still, he really just uses these like static locked down shots throughout a lot of it. Again, you know, like I was saying, evoking those miniatures and stuff, but he kind of, the way he creates horror is so consistent throughout, and it's all through that idea. I love negative space as horror, the idea that, wait, is that something in the corner there, or like maybe not noticing it until it's gone, or that kind of thing. And it's in keeping with this same type of very static imagery, and kind of the idea that it's almost like Annie in those scenes when she is demonically possessed becomes like the horror that she was unwilling to confront in her miniatures, like kind of manifest in that same type of imagery in a sense. And then you get the cultists coming in, and it's all very kind of subliminal and very not showy in a sense.
Yeah, it's like, and to be sure, like, this isn't me like saying like, oh, this actively like ruins my enjoyment of the movie.
No.
Like, no, it's like, especially again, seeing it a second time, there's still like, I'm still like, oh, I'm on edge, because, you know, you have Peter, he's discovering all the crazy stuff that's going on. You know, there's naked people breaking into his house, like appearing in the doorways. You know, and then Annie like decapitates herself with like a wire, and then
That was... Ugh.
And then poor Peter throws himself out the window, and then Paimon swoops in, grabs his body, and we get the big finale and like this very like, I would say like Midsummer-esque kind of music, but is it the same composer, by the way?
No, it's not. This one was Colin Stetson. He's like a multi-instrumentalist. And then Bobby Krillage, or the Hacks and Cloak, did Midsommar. But similar vibes for sure.
Yeah, it's like little like little bells and everything. It feels like almost, again, like I would say like a holy service, more like an unholy service.
Yeah.
Little bells.
He creates this like sense of like ecstatic release.
Yeah, and it's just like, it's because you're kind of saying the thing like, oh my god, the bad guys won. Oh, this sucks. I mean, it's great, but it sucks.
No, it's both of those films are very much like a tragedy that's kind of presented on some level as a triumph for somebody.
Yeah, you know, it's and it's just it's fascinating. And I also like, I will say this, like with the ending, I do like that it kind of gives you the straight answer of what happened. You know, it's like, you know, it's like, your erroneous female body has been corrected. We now have a male vessel for you. and the fact that they call us like Charlie, you are Payman, and I was like, and I like that. I like that little. It does give you that sense of closure there. Like, okay, you finally understand what the heck was going on with everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like you're saying, there is definitely like a buy-in that you have to go through when it does kind of just become straight up possession or whatever, a possession movie. But it delivers just a very kind of clean-cut final beat that is like, okay, we don't necessarily, like, ambiguity for the sake of ambiguity isn't always quote-unquote better.
Yeah, and I appreciate, because again, it delivers us the answers without feeling too didactic about it. It's just like, it's delivered in a way that feels pretty natural, and you're like, okay, now I know what was going on. I understand this 2-hour-long nightmare perfectly now. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's just all around. Really enjoyed revisiting this. And I like, because for a long time, like, I get, I like this, but it's like, oh, I don't know if it's my favorite. And now, being able to come back to this and say, oh no, there was a lot here that I didn't pick up the first time, that's always nice. I always like when that happens.
Yeah, I think it's just a really, this was his debut feature, just a really confident kind of opening statement that he's kind of gone on to do interesting things since.
So, can't wait to see does he already have his next project lined up?
I think I've seen like things about your early production.
Begonia. Or Wait, what?
Eddington, I think. I don't know.
Yeah,
what it is.
Ari Aster's next summit A24 Eddington to star Joaquin Phoenix. Well, are you sure about that?
Well, it's not just not about gay cowboys.
Oh, Pedro Pascal's going to be in it too.
Oh. Well, he was in Almodovar's Gay Cowboy short with Ethan Hawke, so there's still a chance.
There we go. Oh yeah, that'll be. I hope so. Yeah, because I'm just excited to see what he does next. And there is like one more thing that I think is interesting, because this kind of gets brought up.
Mm-hmm.
So the cinema score for this movie, and I don't know if this is something you're interested in talking about at all, but
I'm curious.
So the cinema score for this movie is brought up as a way to kind of show how unreliable the cinema score is.
Mm-hmm.
Because this got a D actually.
Well.
But it's weird because, hold on, let me go here. Because I feel like in the popular consciousness, this is still like a pretty well-liked movie.
Mm-hmm.
Wait,
you got D as in Delta?
D as in Delta.
Yeah, I don't know who gets those cards.
Yeah, it's like... And it's interesting because... Usually, because what the cinema score does is that one, it kind of removes the selection bias. Because if you look at a Rotten Tomatoes audience score, IMDb or whatever, you're limited to the people who went to the trouble of going to the site to leave their opinion. But with cinema score, it collects the information from the people who are in the theater. So people who wouldn't normally go online to talk about movies. And so I just think it's kind of interesting to think about, was there some kind of dissonance between what people expected and what they got? Did people think that was going to be more of a horror movie? Because this really has it kind of feels like equal parts of horror and a drama. Because most of the latter half of the movie is is the family dealing with all the shit that has been happening.
Yeah. Well, I also have to wonder, and I've like seen pictures of the cards that get handed out, and I think it's like mostly just demographic information and then like give it a letter score. But I wonder if a film that is, I mean, I have to imagine if you're making the active choice to go to a horror movie, you kind of have some degree of understanding, though I'm sometimes surprised by what I've seen in theaters. But I wonder if something that is certainly emotionally like grueling might be a bit extreme, but is taxing, if your immediate gut reaction might be a little bit more negative, potentially.
That is true. It's like, because this is a shocking movie. Me and my the guy who does the subtitles of my videos, DM watched this with me, and I warned him before, and it's like, listen, this movie is really intense. He's like, oh, it's I want to watch it with you. I was like, are you sure? There's like, it gets really fucked up. And even with that warning, he was telling me that he was feeling queasy during the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like, I think it might just be the fact that Ari Aster is kind of a hard sell for most people. Because, like, you know, people be like, oh, be like, oh, I want to recommend this movie to you. I said, oh, what is it like? It's like, well, it's miserable. It's very good, but you'll be miserable. And it's not really a strong selling point.
True.
So, yeah, it's... I don't know. Like, again, we were talking about this when we talked about Beau is Afraid last year.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are like, oh, they don't really care for our stuff. I'm just looking forward to what he does next, because I think he has a very interesting style. I think he has very, again, impeccable skill getting actors to unearth things that I wouldn't be, I can't even put into words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that he's interesting in terms of, like taking these really just charged characters and finding confident performances, imbuing the way the story is told in a way that feels of a part with the story itself, but is also just very aesthetically engaging to look at. I think he's shown that he's good at like horror here. He's good at comedy, which you see in various forms in Beau is Afraid and in Midsommar to an extent. I'm interested to see where he goes. I think he can be prone to, I think he showed with Beau is Afraid to be a little bit, for me at least, over self-indulgent, but sometimes that's fine.
It was the perfect amount of indulgent, I dare say.
I love 3-hour penis movies.
Any final thoughts on Hereditary?
No, I think we've had an interesting, there's a lot to dig into. I feel like in some regards we've only scratched the surface, but that's what makes it so fun. And it's also just super creepy. That just it's all you need sometimes.
I can't do the thing. But thank you so much for joining me for this tonight. It's always fun. And all of you listening there, if you want to see more of us, I'm Daniel Goldhorn on YouTube.
And I'm Renerd/cinema on Tumblr.
And we'll see you all next time. Take care.
Bye.